visit Eastern Market on some Saturday, join the crowds meandering through the sheds, picking up bagels, tasting cheese, bagging fresh produce. In some sheds, you even find that they have fresh meat under glass and new flowers cut that you can take home and create bouquets. The place is jammed with people. You have to worm your way along. So take that scene from Eastern Market and lay it on top of Jesus in the temple. Only the temple's bigger than Eastern Market. And it's in that large temple space that over in a corner where the bankers are exchanging money that Jesus holds his protest moment. He kicks over a table, the coins go ping, ping, ping as they're rolling on the ground. The dovecots break open, the birds are flying up, swooping, escaping. And then, after he has done his protest moment, Jesus gathers the crowd around him and he starts teaching. Notice, at the beginning, that this is a symbolic action. The place is too big for Jesus to shut it down. It's a symbolic protest against the temple. We understand symbolic actions. We do them ourselves. Ash Wednesday. People come forward in worship. Somebody smears some ash on their forehead, says words about remember you are dust. To dust you will return. On some Good Fridays we gather and we stand up a big cross and we hand out paper and people scribble down the sins they remember, the sins they regret, and then they come and with a hammer and nail and bang and away at the cross, nailing their sins symbolically to the cross. In the same way we understand that Jesus takes away the sins of the world on the cross. We live with symbols. Even those football players, some decide to stay standing. Others decide they're going to kneel down. Both are acting symbolically. The kneelers in protest of our nation's racism. Those who stay standing, they're okay. They don't really think the government's racist. It's a symbol. Jesus does this protest moment in a corner of that huge, huge temple, and it's a protest, a symbol. So what do we make of the symbol? What do we make of it? How do we unpack that demonstration? So maybe there's a clue in the way that Mark puts his gospel together. So Mark, the gospel writer, he takes his material and then he arranges it. And so Mark arranges this gospel story of Jesus' protest in the temple, and he puts it in a sandwich. And the sandwich that he puts it in is this sandwich about the fig tree. First, the upper part of the sandwich is Jesus is hungry. He comes to the fig tree. He looks around, sees a lot of green, no figs. So then he says to the fig tree, you know what he says? He says, may no one, since I can't get any fruit out of you, may no one else ever. That's the upper part. That's the crust of the sandwich. Now the bottom part. A couple days later, the disciples spot that fig tree. It's dead. Now, Jesus appears to be unreasonable because we have an apple tree over here on the corner of the property. Now, after worship today, we all traipse over there looking for apples. Are we going to find apples? Why not? It's not the season. Wasn't the season for figs? So Jesus appears to be unreasonable, but it too is a symbol. It's a symbol pointing inward to the central story that's the meat inside the sandwich. Hospitality in Jerusalem is a big deal. Jesus is this traveling rabbi, this preacher, even he's got a reputation as being a prophet. He comes riding in that palm procession, that parade, comes to the gate of Jerusalem. Hospitality, if he who has been speaking and representing God, where are the leaders of the temple? They don't greet him. They don't welcome him. They don't say, Jesus, you speak for God, welcome to Jerusalem. They in fact shun him. Jesus, in his sandwich, is complaining that temple worship is not fruitful. It is not bearing fruit. Now, worship must always be concerned with bearing fruit, being fruitful. When the church building overflows with people, we don't much worry about whether we're being fruitful or not. On an Easter Sunday, when there's standing room only in sanctuaries, we normally figure, oh, we're doing pretty good by God. But in difficult times, when faith seems in decline, we are less confident. Now, there are some congregations who have settled into complacency as long as the members are happy. When we get together for fellowship, We don't much worry. But maybe for worship to be fruitful, we need to go deeper than imagining that what it's about is filling seats. We might hear in our get-togethers on a Sunday that there's an issue like there was a couple of years ago up in Flint around clean water, and someone within worship may decide, well, I'll go give them a Saturday and I'll help deliver water. So that worship leads to a response beyond the stained glass window. Or maybe worship reminds us that God is reaching out to all kinds of different people, and our own mindsets of who's acceptable to God and who isn't, we come to conclude that maybe we need to do some shifting inside, and so we begin the hard work of changing our minds. That Jesus gets inside of us and challenges the shape of how we thought we'll live. And that takes place in the everyday. So that worships, maybe even some Sunday we all get saturated by the presence of God, and we feel loved, and we go home and we're more able to love our neighbor because we were together. And so worship, to be fruitful, expects response. So turn back to that story of Jesus' protest. Look through Holy Week. And when we look through Holy Week, we know where it's going to go. But in this moment, Jesus' protest is more than that the temple leadership didn't show up to welcome him. Turns out that in that era, the Roman occupiers appointed the high priest. Just like now the Chinese government appoints the bishops in the Roman Catholic Church in China. Otherwise, the Roman Catholic Church isn't allowed to function. So that's the kind of setup that was going on in Jerusalem. The high priest was appointed by the Rome, and their job was to keep the peace. So you got troublemakers, you keep an eye on them. And the other piece of business was you're to make sure the tax money keeps flowing. That the economy functioning in Jerusalem was an economy of extraction. They extracted the money from the Israelites and they sent it to Rome. So that the vulnerable, the poor, the powerless, they were losing. Sort of like the system in this country of ours when it comes to the court system. You know, some poor soul gets pulled over by the police. More often than not, poor soul is black. They are given a ticket, and they're supposed to show up at court. Well, how do you take a day off from work to go, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck? So then you don't show up for court, and then the court fines you for non-appearance. And it starts stacking up. The cost? That's how cities like Ferguson balance their books. Maybe it's how Detroit was balancing its books for a while. Maybe still do. It's an economy of extraction. Jesus is protesting. The God of the Bible is not into economies of extraction. In fact, God opposes that. God is into an economy of restoration. If you've been reading the Old Testament as you have been assigned, those of us reading through the Bible this year, right? We went through Leviticus, been through Numbers, now we're wading through Deuteronomy, and consistently God is saying, if you fall on hard times and go into debt, even if you sell yourself into indenturedness, the debt only lasts 7 years. Then the debt's paid. It's canceled. It's over. Poverty doesn't keep getting handed on generation to generation. It's an economy of restoration, not extraction. Of course, we know how the story ends. The Palm Parade leads to the cross, and it looks like things are going to go back to normal, and then God does God's thing, right? Right? What happens? Jesus gets raised up. God validates what he's been saying all along. And that we, as Jesus followers, we participate in God's economy of sharing that restores, not extracts. So last summer when we went into Detroit and joined the 11,000 volunteers who went through that neighborhood and cut down shrubs and painted and restored the school and turning that school now into an incubator for economic development. We were participating in God's economy. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about helping to dig a well in Kenya. We've already dug one well there, is the Presbyterian Church. It's 350 feet deep. It's run by solar panels, and it changes the area. People have clean water to take home to their families, to water their fields. It changes life. It restores. God is into restoration. And we, as God's people, are invited to follow Jesus into restoring our neighborhoods, our communities. to be a part, not of extracting. In fact, we ought to resist the extracting and stand for restoring all human beings to dignity and wholeness. May it be so.